This show is brought to you by SalCal Real Estate Connections. Welcome to the Telescope View. We're here tonight with the author of The Final Revelation, The Sun Project, co-host Rick Teles, and of course our favorite Martian, Steve Parker.
Wow.
And Larry Mangello. And tonight's show is going to be kind of interesting, Rick. We're going to talk about Apollo 13. And over time, there's been many speculations and theories about what really went on. I got a feeling you know a little bit more about this than we do.
Yeah, this is a little different. Was the Apollo 13 explosion really an accident? And it was kind of, when we were putting the book together, I kind of stumbled upon this. We were talking about something else, and the guys there mentioned space travel, and one of them looked at the other one and said, "Oh yeah, the Apollo 13 explosion." I said, "Yeah, boy, they got lucky." And they kind of smiled and said, "Well, it wasn't quite the way you think it was." And I said, "So, tell me the story." So they kind of went through the story and told me what really happened there. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
I mean, that was that was the scariest thing I think that I have ever encountered, to watch people in space not knowing how you're going to get them back.
Well, as the story goes, the Apollo 13 mission, one of the missions to the moon, they were on their way to the mission to the moon. Everything seemed to be going well, and all of a sudden they had an explosion in one of their oxygen tanks. And it blew off the side of the command module. And then the point there was they didn't have enough oxygen to get to the moon and back to run all their equipment. They were losing battery power, energy power. So they had to turn around, or actually come home. They didn't turn around. They went around the moon, and they came back. And at the time, when they got back, there was an investigation done, and in the end, they said, well, what happened was the explosion was caused by a flaw in the tank that had not been noticed or gone unnoticed, and that's why they had the problem. But there's some issues with that, and when I brought it up with these guys, they said, well, yeah, that's part of the story, but once again, it wasn't the whole story. Mm-hmm. So, again, what we have to remember is during the 1960s, United States, we were locked in this Cold War with the Soviet Union, with the Warsaw Pact. Their goal, of course, was to spread communism throughout the world. They thought that was the way to go. And of course, our goal was, of course, capitalism. In 1962, we saw the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we, everybody will agree, we teetered on the brink of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And throughout the 60s and the 70s, of course, the tensions remained high. So both groups are out there looking for any advantage they could get over the other group. In particular, they are looking for that ultimate technology that could give them dominance, that technology that would give them military superiority and drive their geopolitical influence around the world. So what can we do, or what was possible to find that type of technology?
So what are you telling me? The real mission for these Apollo flights was really beyond what, as far as just to see if, they could get there
to get
or
to the
not.
moon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because, I'm talking to these guys about this, and this was something I had never heard before, but they seem to all have heard about it. And they started talking about it, and they said, well, we've all heard these stories, and Phil, the guy I talked about, he's actually seen the files, the classified files. Well, according to these guys, the original moon missions were more than just a race to the moon for bragging rights, but they were aimed at achieving the ultimate control of space, and supposedly there was this incredibly an obscure plan for forcing direct contact with what they believed was an intelligent alien race that was based on the moon. So somehow both the Soviet Union, according to these guys, and the United States believed there was an intelligent alien race that somehow had some type of base or encampment or whatever on the moon. And I'm looking at it, I said, I've never heard that before. They all said this was incredibly secret. Nobody ever heard about this part of the race.
So you're saying
it was so obscure that nobody ever really knew about it.
You're saying then we wanted to find technology other than what was available.
We just weren't looking for just moon rocks.
Right, and what they said was this was a Cold War battle that nobody ever heard about. And in the end, you're going to find out kind of why. But the belief was that by making contact, they thought this, now nobody said it was or wasn't, by making contact with this alien race, they'd get access to some incredible technology.
Wow.
Once they got that technology, that would assure global dominance. Now, if we just go with, yes, if you had technology that the type of what we've heard that the aliens might have, yeah, you probably would have global dominance. But like these guys said, it was incredibly obscure plan. But there are, like Phil said, there are records and classified files that still exist regarding this. Like I said, in 1970s, the investigation, announced that the explosion on board was caused by an oxygen tank that already had some problems. Okay, well, you can kind of believe that, but I always had a problem with that because I knew one thing about NASA, especially when you pull something out of the warehouse. That's where this spacecraft was. You go through everything like it's new. You retest it, and in fact,
absolutely.
they did. They pressurized and depressurized the O2 tanks. They checked the connections. They tested all the systems, the fuel tanks, and they did it over and over again. And I'm saying, well, didn't they do that? And these guys go ahead, they did. But they said, here's where the glitch came in. And they said, this is really something. They learned that by now, we now understand that the real evidence indicates that these weren't an accident. Documents that they say are still classified as top secret suggested that it was an act of sabotage. Now this is interesting, direct sabotage, intent sabotage. Apparently, according to these guys, even the astronauts were still, as far as they knew, unaware of what happened here. Even though I tend to believe, if you listen to some of these people after the fact, like within the last years, they seem to know a little bit more than they did at the time. At the time, everybody believed that's what it was. Now, of course, the problem I have with the initial assessment is how do you know? Because the piece of the spacecraft that was damaged ended up going off into space. They took a few pictures of it with a camera, but how do you know the tank was flawed? How do you know all this wiring was flawed other than you might see some sparks?
So you're saying, Rick, that it was actually a convenience sabotage?
Yes, what they said is that this was an act of convenience, that apparently there were Warsaw Pact agents on the Apollo mission team. And they were engineers, and their job was to do all this testing. And apparently when they found the flaws, instead of doing anything about it, they omitted them from the pre-flight inspection reports. So they just said, we're not even going to fix those, and whatever happens, happens. Now, maybe nothing would have happened, all right? Maybe it just would have gone through and fine. But according to these people, what the actual reports subsequently said is that these agents decided to omit. So it was a sabotage by omission of the dangers that were there. I mean, they said that there was a problem with the tank, but before the tank left, their inspection report said there was no leaking. There was no arcing of the wiring. Could that have happened, the arcing of the wiring, could that have happened during launch? Sure it could have, because it was a very violent launch. Would the tank started leaking? Maybe, it's possible, but they said it was a flaw that occurred prior to the mission even being started. So that kind of tells you it didn't happen during launch, even though I don't know that they really know one way or the other. So it was kind of a sabotage by convenience. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm saying this you've seen, and one of them said, yes, we saw the classified reports. This is what the engineers believe. Of course, all the engineers are pointing one way and the other way and one way. And they're saying, no, this is what they subsequently learned, but it took years for them to figure that out, probably well into the 70s. This one guy was saying that they finally figured out what was going on here. One of them suggested they actually got their confirmation after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Yeah, after the fall of the wall. Wow. They said then they started getting access to more and more documents as more and more KGB people actually left Russia and came here. They brought stuff with them because they figured that would put them in favor. And they suggested very strongly that that's where they actually learned there was a lot of this going on. In fact, there were Warsaw Pact agents in the mission.
Now, the astronauts, did they ever really get to notice this?
Yeah, I think, like I said before, I think as we went on, as we got to the 90s and you started listening to them talk, they had a different tone about the whole thing that happened. So I think they started to believe that. I mean, some of them were former Navy commanders, right? So I think they knew what we were locked in with the Russians, so it's possible, or the Soviets, so it's possible they may have had some inkling that this was going on. But I thought when I heard this is really interesting, because if you go back and kind of study it, there are some things that were said and done that don't make any sense. Like, how can they be so absolute about this was the problem when they never got the spacecraft back? And the data, even when they were flying, if you go back and you look, the data being fed to them while the thing was flying wasn't telling them really what the problem was. All they knew is they were losing they were leaking O2 out into space. The battery power was dropping. The fuel cells were losing power very consistently and very rapidly. So how they could, after the fact, really re-engineer this without getting a piece of equipment back, a lot of people had questions. I remember even at the time, people had questions about that.
So you're saying it was more like theory that this
is what happened.
They're just thinking that it could have happened this way.
That's the way the explosion happened. And then I hear, well, wait a minute, this is what we're telling you actually happened. And it starts to make a little bit of sense when you consider how the due diligence that NASA puts into a lot of this work when they get ready to fly. Not that they don't take risks. We learned that in the Challenger disaster. But yeah, so all of a sudden we go from, well, gee, we believe it was an explosion caused by a flaw, but then again, we never got the spacecraft back to check it, to these people who, so far, everything they've told me keeps coming out over the last year or two as correct. Everything they were saying was absolutely right. They're telling me, well, actually, and this was like a side conversation that we had, actually, no, there are documents and classified files out there that strongly indicate that the Apollo 13 explosion was not an accident. It was an act of sabotage, kind of by convenience. It happened, or it appeared. They took advantage of it.
You know, you flew something past me a little bit earlier, and I did, and you know, a couple of times this happened. So I know you have some unique sources, and you can't really say who your sources are, and you know, you were able to write the stuff in the book from it's real stories, but they just said don't use our names. But you a couple of times, twice now, I've heard you say Phil. Now, is Phil in the book? Who's Phil?
Phil is in the book.
Okay.
And so I used the name Phil. I mean, our director was a little concerned last time when I tried. He said, you used the name Phil.
Okay.
I said, yes.
Oh, great, and I brought it up again.
That's the name he had in the book.
Okay.
Yeah,
Phil.
that's right.
Okay.
Use that as generic.
Phil was a captain in the United States Navy. He was head of a group of naval intelligence. He provided intelligence briefings to the Joint Chiefs, as well as to some congressional members. Phil was the one who decided what information people could have, especially in terms of our politicians, and what information they could not have, and who could have it. And I always tell the story about him in that, now Phil was exactly what you'd see in the movies. He's kind of a round guy, round head, white cropped hair, cigar. He liked his scotch. Okay, He had what he called a go slow trawler boat that we went on many times. But Phil was also called a Mustang. And in the Navy, a Mustang is somebody who joins up as an enlisted man, a sailor, and then rises to the ranks of a captain. There's only one thing higher, which is an admiral. I don't want to be an admiral. Why? I'm not going to go into what he said about admirals. So this man had seen it all. And if he said, and one time I said, you guys are messing with me. He got a little upset. I don't have time to fool around. If you want to hear it, you want to hear it. If you don't, you don't. Okay, and he kind of left it. But I was with Phil one time when we had gone to, we were in Washington, and we had gone to a hearing at the Capitol. And after the hearing or something, we came out, and there was a senator. I don't remember if it was a senator or a congressman. It doesn't matter. They're all the same to me. And he said something. I think he was on some committee, and this Phil cornered him. And he just lit into him. Now, this is a congressman or a senator. They think they're pretty important. And he got right in his face with like a military man. He goes, what you said back there? And he said what it was. He goes, you are not to talk about things like that in public. You don't do this. And he just lit him up. You know, and these congressmen and senators are like, I'm a U.S. congressman, and I sit on this committee. And he looked him straight in the eye, and he goes, I don't care what committee you sit on. You know only what we tell you, and we don't tell you everything because you can't be trusted.
Oh, boy.
And I'm like, Phil, aren't you worried? He goes, what's he going to do to me?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, all right.
Is Phil still with us?
Phil is still with us.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure where he is at this point.
That's
He goes
okay.
between
That's
two
okay.
different places. But that's what he said to him. And I said, Phil, you know, he goes, it's the truth. What are they going to do to me? He goes, the problem is, he goes, these are transients. They come in and they go. Yeah, some of them stay forever. I don't know why.
Yeah.
He goes, but most of them in their tenure in the Congress or in the Senate are never going to have to deal with this issue. And so we don't tell them. If it comes up that they need to deal with this issue, then we'll tell them. He goes, likewise, it's true with certain presidents. He says, we don't tell every president everything they know.
Yep.
And Bill Clinton eventually said that. He said at one point, yes, I've been trying to get this information, but they don't tell me everything. He actually kind of conceded that point. Doesn't need to know. So that's who Phil was.
Okay.
Okay.
When you kept taking Phil, I thought maybe there's someone here I don't know named Phil.
No, no.
This was an impressive group of guys.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, there's another one I call him Paul, and he was an aeronautical engineer for the Air Force as well as some other things. And we like to say, if it doesn't fly, if it flies, Paul's seen it. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
where it's from.
Now,
So,
the other thing you had talked briefly about, Rick, was the fact that we were looking for, extraterrestrial life or help, but in reality, we went to the moon. We really didn't see anything.
Well, what happened was, and I found this really interesting too, because you know how many people always say, you listen to the Apollo communications from the moon landings, and they say, there's something over there. We've seen it. We've all heard it.
Yes.
And these astronauts are quite sure they saw something. And to this day, Edgar Mitchell, when he passed away, he said, I saw something on that moon. I know I saw it. They all say that. They don't say a whole lot. Well, what they said, as the story goes, is when they got there, they did in fact find some evidence that some type of alien race or someone had been there, but apparently the base was vacated as far as they can tell. Now, they did point out to me there's only so much the Apollo astronauts could do as far as traveling around the moon, but he said that the base itself was vacated.
The base that they
The
saw
aliens
there. Okay,
that they thought they would find there. But they also said that they believe alien, and they use this term, drone craft, observed everything that we did. And there was a number of stories from the Apollo astronauts. They saw this thing shining on the horizon. It was there 1 minute, then it would go away.
I've heard stories about that, yes.
So when you hear that from them without any other information, you say, oh, well, who knows what they saw? It was the moon. And we know that there's certain things that happen on the moon where these crystals will go up in the air and or crystalline
Well,
type.
in reality, there's sections of the moon you can't see.
Dark
really.
side of the moon.
We never see, right?
Oh, Pink Floyd, have they
Yep.
seen it or no? I don't
No,
know.
that was Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, did they see it or did they just say the dark? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it depends what they were doing when they thought they saw the dark side of the moon.
Yeah, the dark side of the moon. Now, that was interesting because recently China said that they landed a spacecraft on the dark side of the moon.
Yes.
How would they know unless they had another craft circling the moon or a satellite, because they can't get the signal back unless it bounces off of something. And there's no indication that there's any other craft or anything orbiting the moon. As far as we know, some people say there is. We do have something orbiting the moon. We have our own spacecraft orbiting the moon. But
Now, do we find out, for instance, we do a lot with Facebook here. Are a lot of things on Facebook that pertain to subjects like this, or, because it's like with the internet, people must look at this kind of stuff all the time, right?
they do. I mean, you can go on the internet. You can find a lot of different things. Never about this. This is one I think we have kind of exclusive. You heard some stories, but never this. I have a Facebook page for the book, and I tend to just write stories on it. The stories don't necessarily have to have anything to do with the book, but I write the information that I have. Stories like this one and the one that we did in the past, Walt Disney.
Walt Disney, oh
20,000 viewers want to see that because you're not going to see this anywhere else, not right now. Now, it's interesting because some of the stuff we wrote in the book all of a sudden is popping up all over the place. Ancient Aliens,
Yes.
Expedition Unknown, Mysteries of the Unexplained. Things that we said, is a coincidence? Yeah, could be. Just popping up all of a sudden, things that we said that in the past people had dismissed, all of a sudden now it's accepted. I don't know. So, yeah.
Well, what's interesting too is every day you used to hear about people talking about a space force. Now, what is that about, Rick?
That's another interesting thing about, we keep talking about this Space Force. I don't know. I never asked anybody really about it. I'm always told there's a lot more going on than you're ever going to imagine.
Sure.
Sure. The thing that happened the other day that I thought was interesting is we've been talking, and we've talked a number of times, why haven't we gone back to the moon? And nobody's really been talking about it. Even if you go to NASA and you go to the NASA website or the JPL website, you haven't seen a lot about going back to the moon. In fact, I heard a thing once a few years ago saying they're having difficulty understanding how to do that. Well, we already went. All of a sudden,
Or did we go? That's a whole nother subject.
all of a sudden the other day I'm reading an article from NASA about some of their new projects that they're bringing on board, and they're talking about their next mission to the moon in 5 years.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, going to the moon is now important again, and they want to build a base. We were talking about going to Mars and saying, well, why haven't we built a base on the moon? Because you can, you can stage things and then go. All of a sudden now, NASA's talking about it. All of a sudden now, NASA's talking about every one of their missions, a key component of every one of their missions will be the search for extraterrestrial life. All of a sudden, within the last, I'd say, 18 months, this whole thing with extraterrestrial life has just gone through the roof.
But what's the difference, excuse me, what's the difference time-wise if we go to the moon or we do go to Mars? I mean, as far as how long it takes to get there.
Well, it takes 3 days to go to the moon.
A lot longer to get to Mars.
See, it's a staging area. You could go to the moon, then from there go to Mars. There's all kind of activity or thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we have to start to we have to start to understand what it takes to get to Mars. If we could bring stuff up to the moon and not have to carry it on the liftoff for the Mars equipment, makes it a lot easier to start to get there.
Oh, it certainly does. And you know, and Rick, we've talked about this, where now NASA is starting to get classes to teach teachers about this subject, which you never saw that before, never.
They had a whole training program for teachers grades 4 through 12, and they wanted teachers to start explaining how a key component of every mission that NASA will be doing now will be the search for extraterrestrial life, intelligent extraterrestrial life.
That's right.
And we're finding it in more and more places. I think what really is starting to break this is all the life that's being found within our solar system. It's everywhere. You know, Jupiter, Saturn. Now they were talking the other day of how, I thought this was interesting too. You got to read what NASA says. They're finally, this next probe that's going to Mars will be able to drill farther into the surface. And they want to drill that so they can study what the ancient life on Mars was. Not if there was ancient life on
What
Mars.
it was.
What it was.
Ancient now, that could be everything from a microbe to a few molecules.
Yeah.
But what ancient life on Mars was. And we can talk about that at another time, how I was told.
I mean, there's
a
all
whole
kind
civilization there that
there's
got
all
wiped
kind
out.
of theory. They even talk about the moon being hollow. I mean,
Well, that was interesting because on one of the other shows, I was listening to somebody from MIT, and she was saying, we now know there's lots of tunnels and caves within the moon. You never hear them really come out before.
They don't talk about the cheese. I thought it was made of cheese.
Well, now you know it's Swiss. All right. So,
All those holes.
so things pop up every day, and I thought this was an interesting one to talk about. And again, nobody has to believe what we say. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm trying to give you information and hope that you consider it. Try looking it up. Try adding up all the numbers yourself and see what does it make any sense. I think it starts to.
What makes sense is the most important thing.
Yep.
And we're finding, Rick, that day after day, there's new information coming out.
Every day, you can't keep up with it.
You can't keep up. That's right.
I can't wait till the next time we get together. You make me a little bit nervous sometimes. I mean, you know, having you here and these people that use names, but we don't know where they exist, and it's all in your book. You refer to these different people.
All these people are in the book. You refer to them.
Well,
I've had people try to ask me, well, what's their real name?
Right.
And what was their exact rank in military service? No.
No, you're not going to know.
As it is, we pushed the envelope, and I paid the price for that more than once.
In reality, Rick, I hope someday that we literally have a show about the book itself, a weekly show. And believe me, we are looking forward to that.
I wish someday I could bring somebody in here and say, see this man? Ask him any question you want because he can tell you things that you've never heard before.
Put them in a silhouette. Put them in a shadow.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
Rick, this has been a very interesting subject.
Wow.
And over the years, there's been all kind of theory about what went on there. And I'm sure today the viewers got a really good idea of what possibly could happen there.
And I'll leave you with one other thought. There are some people who have said that getting them back was not all us, that we had some help.
Oh, boy.
So,
That's another subject. Well, Rick, as usual, time is flying, and I want to remind everybody, please email us at theviewshow@aol.com. We want to hear from you, and I'm sure you'll have some questions for us.
Ask anything you like.
You got it. Thank you, and good night.